Yeah, that's just a cover. It's just for my mother, actually. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. My plan for this tonight is to give around half an hour, and I see my task as essentially trying to exposit, and if I can be so bold to say, kind of extrapolate and strengthen Neil Postman's argument that he makes in 1987 when he writes, Amusing Ourselves to Death. So let's situate ourselves in the landscape here. What exactly is going on? Is this philosophy? So I teach philosophy, my background's in philosophy. When you go home tonight and you tell your loved ones that you listen to a lecture, you tell them it's a philosophy lecture. Well, kind of. It's not philosophy in the strictest sense. Neil Postman seems to think that it's epistemology, which is like philosophy of knowledge, how we know things, how we come to know things. It could be philosophy of media. Those are branches of philosophy, undoubtedly. But at the very least, it's philosophy adjacent, because what I'm planning on speaking on tonight and kind of resounding what Postman exposited 30 years ago is related to public discourse, how we as a country, as we as a society, talk about the things that matter. So if this isn't philosophy per se, it's at least affecting philosophy, and it is affecting thought as thought. If we're going to be thinking things, what I'm going to talk about tonight is going to be affecting us. So that's kind of my first throat-clearing point, is this philosophy? The second kind of preamble here is this worth your time? So perhaps I'm stating the obvious. Perhaps amusing ourselves to death, we can all say that the telephone and all of the media is having corrosive effects on society. It really doesn't take, actually I'm fairly certain if I give the microphone to like every person in this room that they can stand up here and say why it's bad that we're amusing ourselves to death. But I hope to prove in the next 30 minutes that this actually is worth your time, because the argument is subtle and it articulates clearly what we all kind of feel in kind of with vague sentiments about the corrosive nature of media on our society. The last point, this is to maybe make this first point more explicit. This is an a fortiori argument, I take it. So I'm talking about the television specifically, but we've moved past that, right? As I'm very well aware, I work with high schoolers, and like TikTok is all the rage, and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, where it's just like we've moved past the television. But I actually see that as grist for my mill. This is great. If I can prove that the television is detrimental towards human flourishing in our society, then I can prove a fortiori, that's Latin for to the stronger, I can prove then that the phone is detrimental. Right, so an a fortiori point, like if I can prove that it's hard for English speakers to learn English grammar, I can prove a fortiori that it's hard for non-native speakers to learn English grammar. It's kind of like the let alone argument. Like it's hard to learn English as a native, let alone as a non-native. So that's my plan for tonight, is the television's pretty bad, let alone the phone. So all of my arguments should be able to be applied to the phone in an elevated register. Okay, enough throat clearing. Let's get to the position. So I put it in italics. Here's the thesis. Television makes us less rational in our approach to life, and thereby militates against human flourishing. So it actually makes us less rational, and then that militates against human flourishing. What's good for us? How bad is the damage? Neil Postman doesn't really make this explicit clear as like how bad he thinks it is. Again, he was writing in 1987. May he rest in peace. He died in 2003. He never saw how bad it came to be. Right? I think God spared him. But I mean, the jury's still out as to how bad this actually is. There are some people who are on complete one side of the spectrum, like this is the worst thing in the world. Others on the other side, and I'll kind of let you guys make your mind on that. The first big distinction I want to make about tonight's conversation is this distinction between junk television and serious television. As Neil Postman says, the best things on television are its junk. So he's not targeting the sitcoms, the sports, the stuff that's obviously not praiseworthy. He has this quote here: "We don't measure a culture by its output of undisguised trivialities, but by what it claims as significant." Right, so no one's taking the sitcom seriously. No one in society is like, yes, this is really important stuff, and makes me proud to be an American that we have this sitcom. He's targeting serious television. Anytime television attempts to take itself seriously, like now we're doing something serious. This is where we're going to talk about something serious, and we're going to get down to business. That is where Neil Postman says, stop right there. Something's gone horribly wrong. Right, so it's not the junk, it's the serious television that he's really concerned about. And that's part of the subtle point, because a lot of the critique that we're hearing, like from Jonathan Haidt and this sort of thing, and from authors contemporary, is targeted toward the junk, and that's good. And we can talk about that, and that has its place about how it's bad for the soul, right? It kind of appeals to our base desires. It fills the imagination with things that it ought not be filled with. But that's kind of like one argument, and I kind of want to leave that to the side. I think that we're all pretty much on the same page with that one. The argument that Neil Postman's talking about is about what it's doing to us as a society intellectually and in our discourse. So these next 3 bullet points are like the meta arguments. This is basically his structure of arguing for his position. And then he gets basically more precise, things that are contained implicitly in these 3 points. He is concerned with the forms of human conversations. The forms. So conversation, right? Conversatio, the Latin, turning towards. We can communicate, right? I mean, I'm communicating with you right now. And communication, as far as I'm concerned, boils down to there are things in my intellect, my mind, that I want to get into your mind somehow. And I have many means, many mediums at my disposal to do just that, to get what's in my intellect, what I know, to you. So I might shoot you a text. I might write an email. I might speak to you face to face. I might make a poem, right? Something really deep inside of me that I can only express by a poem. I can just do a hand gesture, right? You ask me, "How's your day, Jack?" And I've communicated. I've engaged in human conversation in a certain way. Now, notice all of those forms of human conversation are not created equal. There's only so much you can communicate in a hand gesture, right? You talk to your spouse, "How much do you love me?" That's not going to cut it. The mediums are not neutral, right? They constrict and circumscribe what you can say. They are not just kind of this neutral middleman who's just purely communicating from what's my intellect into yours. It's always kind of filtering. It's always conditioning. Think of the difference, right, between writing an email and writing a text. Those are 2 very different things. And even if you copy them word to word, it doesn't still work the same, right? Like if I copied my email and sent it in a text, sent text to my friend, I was like, "Is something wrong?" You ended your text with "best regards." Like, are you okay? So that's the first point. We have forms of human conversation. They're not all the same. They all kind of taint, in some way, shape, or form, for better or for worse, the pure transfer of intellectual knowledge. Okay, that's the first point. Second point. How we are obliged to conduct such conversations will have the strongest possible influence on what ideas we can conveniently express. So again, let's go back to these forms. I'm going to pick a new form this time, smoke signals. I want you to imagine if our society was constituted by communicating through smoke signals, right? So you have like fire, and you put your hand over the fire, and it creates smoke signals, right? And that's like how we communicate. That was just the air we breathe. That's just how we do things. That's going to limit, for example, what we're doing tonight. You can't have a sustained conversation about philosophy and about what's good for our country over smoke signals. Right, so we see an example of a medium that is constricting what I can say, and then that constriction is going to be ordered towards whatever is easiest to do, right? So if all we have is text, we're going to communicate with whatever is easier to do over text. If all we have is poetry, right, it's going to be really hard to send like business emails, right? I'm not sure how I'd make a poem to tell them, like, that the printer's broken, So it's going to be structured towards what's easiest. Now this is the most important point, right? So this is the third point now. I'm talking about the forms. They're not neutral, and they bias towards whatever is easiest to communicate. And what ideas are convenient to express inevitably become the important content of a culture. So this is the crucial bit right here, is that because all the mediums are constricting as to what exactly we can say, that constitutes the culture. That makes up the culture. If we can only communicate by a smoke signal, then our culture, our society, what we take as precious is going to be whatever we can communicate over smoke signal. So we're going to be really jazzed about like sending SOS signals and talking about food and this sort of thing. But we're not going to be able to do philosophy. Philosophy is not going to be on our minds or on our hearts because we can't do it, right? We can't do it. So those are that's the meta argument. Different types of communication, they bias towards a certain direction, and then that direction is going to constitute our culture. That's going to make up kind of the meat and potatoes of what it means to be a part of whatever society. Okay. On to page 2. Okay, so that's the meta argument. Now let's look at this in action. We're going to look at the written word. So what would happen if the medium by which we communicated or through which we communicated was the written word? Well, first off, let's just examine what the written word is. Almost every scholar who has grappled with the question of what reading does to one's habits of mind has concluded that the process encourages rationality. So I want you to think about reading for a second. It's very interesting. We take it for granted. Human beings, right, we're rational animals. We can do lots of things. We can climb mountains. We can move, have jobs, create families, this sort of thing. But when you see someone reading, it's kind of bizarre at first. Here's a person motionless, staring at just paper with little squiggles on it, and they are just rapt with attention. Reading is, by its very nature, an intellectual endeavor. It's a rational enterprise to read. I'm not saying, it makes a genius just to read. I'm just saying that very act, in the same way that going to the gym and exercising is a muscular endeavor, using your intellect to read is an intellectual endeavor. You have to look beyond the squibbles and get to the immaterial concepts, and as Neil Postman would say, negotiate the world of abstractions. Right? When you're reading, you're not, unless you're reading a picture book, you're not seeing anything visual. You are having to engage your intellect, even if it's not highbrow literature, even if it's just simple literature. Just by the fact of reading, you are engaging your intellect. You are using and exercising that muscle, right? You're abstracting and contemplating things that you can't see, right? That by its very nature is intellectual, using our God-given intellect. So it just so happens that a certain society did read quite a bit, and that was their main medium. And that is early America. America was founded by intellectuals, had a very literate beginning. It was the first nation ever to be argued into existence in print. This is fascinating, right? A lot of nations, how do they start, right? It's like we're all of a certain ethnic group. And it's like, well, we better start a country to protect ourselves, right? We don't want to get invaded. America was argued into existence. They poured dirt on the sidewalks of Philadelphia while they were penning, kind of like the main documents, right? Declaration of Independence, Constitution. So that way there wouldn't be distracting noises of people walking the sidewalk. That way they could have pure silence as they really thought about what is the best way to run a country, right? They were really using their intellects to think about this. Now, whether they got it right, is a different conversation. But nevertheless, it was not just a volitional, like we're going to protect ourselves. They were really negotiating the world of abstractions, right? But reading, furthermore, was not an elitist activity. The literacy rates in the 17th century, Massachusetts and Connecticut, are said to have been between 89 and 95%, which is pretty comparable, if not higher, than what it is now in Connecticut. And they weren't reading like tabloid news. They were reading Thomas Paine's Common Sense, to which I'm not sure if you guys have ever, just perused Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Very nice, light reading. The vernacular and the syntax, it's advanced. It would send a lot of us for a loop. And this is what they were doing. Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? We could say something similar there. It is important, I do want to make this distinction, that most of the reading was actually from the newspapers and pamphlets. But nevertheless, I think that the syntax and kind of the level at which they were communicating would still probably surprise us. Thomas Paine's Common Sense printed 400,000 copies, which would be the equivalent in 2020 numbers as 40 million, which is remarkable. Like, this is just what they were reading. This was just the thing to do, right? We were talking about the mediums kind of constituting the culture. They were just a reading society. What constituted the culture was reading, was abstracting and thinking about liberty and human nature and what is a just society. So it shouldn't surprise us that we get an analytic atmosphere. So we can think of the debates of Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. I never tire of repeating this. This is great. So Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas going around the country and they're debating. and they would debate for hours on end. There's one anecdote where Stephen Douglas gets up and these things were spectacles, by the way. I mean, they would draw these big crowds. There would be like food and drinking and bands. But then once the debate got started, everyone kind of simmered down. Although they would like holler stuff. So Stephen Douglas gets up there and debates for 3 hours. And Abraham Lincoln gets up and it's his turn. He says, all right, well, ladies and gentlemen, it's already 5 o'clock. Why don't we go home, have dinner, come back, and we'll finish the debate. And apparently that's just how it went. Like, it's okay, that sounds right. Yeah, we'll go home, come back. I mean, I'm already kind of getting ahead to comparison. But do you guys know, I'm not like testing you, don't worry, but do you guys know how long candidates are given for political questions now? It's like on the debate. I think it's like 2 minutes, right? Or I think it actually went down to 90 seconds. So yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. Again, just kind of point of comparison. To have a sustained argument for 3 hours and listening to a 3-hour rebuttal, and that just being like your palate could tolerate that. As an American, you're like, yes, this is important, and I can actually tolerate listening to 3 hours of rhetoric. One last anecdote. Stephen Douglas gets a particularly loud round of applause after one of his remarks, and he says, I would prefer silence. I want to appeal to your understanding, not your passions. Okay. Sorry, I lied. One more. They would pile into these like lecture halls. This is very interesting to me. Like what you would do after. And I'm sorry, I could just keep on going on and on, but this really is the last one. Like after work, it's early America. They're working grueling jobs. They would like just pile into these like lecture tents where it's think of like a circus tent, but instead of like people doing crazy stuff, it was just like a guy like lecturing about like the nature of liberty or whatever. I think it's so funny. Like after work, where are you going today, Bob? I'm going to the lecture, of course. Where else would I go? So this was, like I said, this is just the air they breathe. This was the meat and potatoes of their society was intellectual activity. Doesn't mean they were geniuses. It just means that they were using their God-given intellect to examine reality and hopefully correspond themselves to reality, right? That you figure out what's there, and then you realize, okay, well, since that's the case, how should I live? How ought I live? So, in sum, a little recap. Our culture's medium of choice affects our public discourse in a manner that reflects the biases of the medium. Okay, so now what you all come here for, talk about the television. And you guys have already I'm sure you can see where I'm going. So the television didn't pop out of nowhere. First you had the telegraphy, right, which, as Neil Postman says, enabled, right, the telegraph, enabled Maine and Texas to communicate with each other in an instant, although it's not exactly clear as to what they would want to communicate about. You had the photography, which is able to mimic basically the way it bends light and the way that our eyes bend light, and so it can produce something that's like image or like visual. And you have the radio, right, which is able to carry the human voice across miles, like completely unprecedented. And then you get the television. So, right, we talk about reading. You're abstracting. You're looking at just black squiggles on a white piece of paper, and you're thinking about the intellectual concepts. Television is like the exact opposite of that. To make full use of television as a medium, the program might have short shot lengths, maybe no more than 7 seconds, attractive show host, interesting lighting with plenty of on-screen graphics and effects. People, after all, like to watch dynamic, ever-changing, exciting images. Right, so the television actually, because all the pixels, right, I mean, that's what it is, a series of pixels that project light. They can change every second if they want to. In fact, that's what it is. It's 30 frames per second. You're seeing a new image or 30 new images every second. To make full use of it, then, it could be constantly changing. And that's really kind of the pace of television made entirely of its full use, right? That to make full use of television, you can, and if you want to survive in the industry, do these things, having music, on-screen graphics, like I said, all those sorts of lighting. I want to hone in on this music point here. I always kind of marvel at this. Top of page 3 with this quote on 102. All television news programs begin, end, and are somewhere punctuated in between with music. What has music to do with the news? Why is it there? This is one of those things when I first read that, I was like, you're right. Because I'm an American, I grew up in this culture. It's like, of course there's music in the news. But once you realize, what is it doing there? Tonight's news. What? Like, am I watching a theater production? I mean, and of course, what are they talking about? The mayor's proposing this new proposal, and now the music's going. There was a double homicide in downtown. And all the while the music's going. And of course, whenever they take the music away, then it's like, okay, now it's really serious. Like I remember when President Trump got shot, it was like there's no music. It's like, okay, well now it's like serious news. But the double homicide and the mayor's proposal, that's like that's the fun stuff. So we can already start to see the distinctions here, right? There's no music when you're reading. There's no razzling and dazzling, not of the intellect, but of the passions, right? This is what the television is ordered towards, your passions, the animalistic part of us. So let's take the 1985 debates. Again, this is the a fortiori point. If it's bad in 1985, like I said, I think God spared Postman. He would just die on the spot if he saw it now. Postman thinks complexity, documentation, and logic can play no role. When a television show is in progress, it is nearly impermissible to say, let me think about that, or I don't know, or what do you mean when you say? Right, so if you and I are having a conversation tonight talking about political matters, and you bring up a good point and say, oh yeah, let me think about that for a second, or I don't know, or I'll get back to you. These are like normal human things you can do. But on the television, there's nothing more boring than watching someone think, right? It's like the most uninteresting thing in the world. And in fact, if I started to think up here, you guys can only tolerate for so long before you get uncomfortable, right? But on the television, what do? You'll just change the channel, right? There's another one of the detrimental effects of television is that at any moment you can change the channel. Because assumedly, right, if you guys are displeased with the lecture so far, you're not just going to get up and leave. That would make me very uncomfortable if you did. But with a television show, it's just, this is boring, click, right? It's always there to change the channel. And so again, there's that incentive to keep it constantly entertaining, right? Because that's what the television is. It's a series of images with audio. And then, of course, really the detrimental effects of this. It would appear that fat people are now effectively excluded from running for high political office, probably bald people as well. Indeed, we may have reached the point where cosmetics has replaced ideology as the field of expertise which the politician must have competent control. So if you're not at least somewhat attractive, your political career is dead in the water. And that should terrify us. What does being attractive have to do with running a country? What does being able to deliver a witty line in a debate have to do with negotiating foreign affairs? The two have nothing to do with each other. But yet, because of the television, that becomes the value that we not only see, but then kind of as a consequence, come to trust and come to basically have be the deciding factor because it's in our face, because we kind of know how they have their on-stage persona. Right, so point of comparison, it's quite likely that most of the first 15 presidents of the United States would not have been recognized had they passed the average citizen industry. Right, so, when I say to you now, George W. Bush, or Barack Obama, or Joe Biden, the first thing you think of is an image. You might even think of a video of him, or just a picture of him. But if I say to you, James Madison, now I'm not sure how much you guys are reading early America, probably better things to do with your time. But if most people, you say James Madison, you're thinking of his writings. Oh, Federalist Paper number 10. Oh, he was, supporting of this policy, this sort of thing. That's the first thing you think of. And that little demonstration right there is the difference between a society constituted by reading and a society constituted by image. Right, that's the difference. When you think of Donald Trump, you think of a persona and image. When you think of an early American founding father, you think of their ideas. And again, the ideas should be more important when we're talking about running a country, when we're talking about public discourse. And just kind of before I transition here, I really want to hammer home this point, that it's not a coincidence. This is just the nature of the medium, right? If the medium biases towards imagery, and whatever we're going to try to fit in that medium is going to have to correspond with the biases of that medium. If we're trying to fit how to run a country, you're going to have to play the games of the television, right? It's like taking, it's like those kid toys, with a square circle and the round peg. If you're trying to fit that square circle into the round peg because, darn it, that's the only way we can win votes. That's the only way we can get anybody elected. It's the only way we can get anything done. So everything has to be cast in the light of entertainment. Everything has to be cast in the light of showmanship if you want to, again, survive. Which that alone should terrify us, because then what it means, right, It's a filtering process. What it means is that whatever appears on television has first been filtered through the process of, well, will this be entertaining? So we don't even know whether we're getting the truth or not. Now, maybe that's too drastic. But the standard by which they're judging whether this should be on television is the standard of entertainment, not truth. Which, I don't know, that's about as bad as it gets. Speaking of which, how bad is this? I think it's worth noting that people go to the television for everything. Again, a fortiori, people go to the phone now for everything. Like, if you want to find out about the president, you go to your phone, you read something online. If you want to find out about local community or the weather or getting a haircut or anything, I mean, it's just ubiquitous. So if there's something tainted in the water and we're drinking it all the time, then we should expect the damage to be pretty bad. Right? The television is our culture's principal mode of knowing about itself, and how the television stages the world becomes the model for how the world is properly to be staged. So if you think that the world is some sort of like showy, if you're constantly seeing the world as presented as some sort of showy, entertaining, almost whimsical affair, the real world is going to slap you in the face. You're not going to like it. Because wait, that's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be what I'm seeing on the phone, right? We can rattle statistics off as to how much time people are spending on the phone. And so that becomes the model by which to judge reality. If a priest is too boring in his homily, he's out of touch. It's not that he's engaging in a different enterprise than what's done on television, but that something's wrong with him. Right? You can see how this would start to taint everything that we look at and we intake. This is a wordless manifesto, right? What's happening in America is not the design of an articulated ideology. No Mein Kampf or Communist Manifesto announced it's coming. Here is ideology without words, and all the more powerful for their absence. Right, so it's kind of a subtle effect. No one's arguing for this. It's just kind of happening. We just kind of find ourselves in this situation. I want to stay good on time, so I'm going to skip that last quote and go to these objections here on page 4. So I can leave plenty of time for questions, because I'm sure this is stirring some thoughts up. The objection one that I want to first talk about is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Literally translated after this, therefore because of this, right? So because, yes, the sun comes up after the sunrise, the sunrise happens after the sunset, but the sunset doesn't cause the sunrise. So correlation and causation fallacy. And I do want to margin my argument. I think that Postman, I'm with Postman on this one. I should be very surprised if the story we have to tell is anywhere near the whole truth. So yeah, there are other factors at play here as to why public discourse is broken down. It's not just the television. So for objection one, I pretty much bite the bullet. Yep, that's right. It's not the whole story, but it's a piece of the pie, undoubtedly. The second objection about emotional power, perhaps the television's good because it can motivate people to do things they would otherwise not have done. If we can show images and videos of devastated Ukrainian families, then maybe they'll support the war and be able to basically to urge them unto a virtuous action. This objection I find to be less forceful. I think that power can be abused and used well. Right, that sword cuts in both directions. If I can motivate people to do do good actions with imagery, it seems like I can just as easily motivate them to do bad actions or misguided actions with imagery. And then kind of a pragmatic point, the people who are in charge of the television programs, I don't want them wielding that sword, right? If America's pathos is in the hands of the executive of whatever nightly news program, I think we're in for a precarious time. So I don't think that wielding emotional power like a sword is a good idea. Last one, this is the objection that I'm going to spend the most time on and disagree with most vehemently. The idea is that, but Jack, come on, it produces an informed public, right? People are up to date now. They know what's going on in Ukraine. They know what's going on in Israel. They know what's going on with the president. We're creating a public conscience. We're informing our consciences for voting. We're all on the same page. No one's being left in the dark. Yeah, sure, it's entertaining, but how else are they going to read it? They're not going to read. So the next best thing is for us to kind of show it to them on the television. I think that's all wrong. I think that's all bad. I think that serious television tends to produce disinformation. And disinformation does not mean false information. It doesn't mean that they're lying to you. It means misleading information, right? Misplaced, irrelevant, fragmented, or superficial information. Information that creates the illusion of knowing something, but in fact leads one away from knowing. The 20th century Dominican Father Gary Gilagrange talks about that like the lies use the truth as kind of like their tools to kind of go to get along. And again, I said they're not lying to us, but I mean I'm not sure as to how much ill will I can attribute to these people. But, there's some truth to this. It's just not the whole story. And because there's some truth to us, it gets us very much convinced of the argument. We hear a few things, we hear a few taglines on whatever media source we're taking in, and it's true. And so now we feel really convinced, and we think that we really know what's going on. But we likely have no idea as to the full story. And so I think that the informing of the public is actually detrimental because it creates people. I'm going to do something very arrogant. I'm going to quote myself. It's better to have a citizen who knows nothing about politics, but knows that he knows nothing about politics, than to have a citizen who knows nothing about politics, but thinks himself an expert. For the former, in humility, will recognize his ignorance and refrain from overstepping his bounds. But the latter may make extremely bad decisions based on the disinformation he has learned. Right, so the informed public is making a generation of so-called experts who feel really confident about what they know, even though they have no degree in the specialty, no time in the field. It really is shocking how people feel competent to speak about like the Supreme Court and like how they work. I would love to ask these people, like, if they can first off just name me all 9 justices, or even like tell me how to read a Supreme Court ruling, right? I mean, these things, of course, they would never want to do such a thing. Why? Because it's very boring to do so, right? And we kind of feel it too, right? I mean, I'm this way. I'll read a news story, and it's like, oh, to really understand this, I would have to read this other thing. And it's like, just don't want to do it. And it's in the evening, I'm just trying to relax. I don't want to read a Supreme Court ruling, right? It's like the worst thing to read. But yet that's what I would have to do to understand what's going on in the Planned Parenthood case, for example. So what people do is they kind of take just enough, so it sounds like they know what they're talking about, and then they just run with it. And as Neil Postman says, again, this affects all parts of life. So I'm in Catholic circles, so I can say this. This affects our theology. Because we have a bunch of theologians running around, or so-called theologians, who feel competent to talk about like Vatican II documents because they've read a blog. Or because they've heard some YouTuber talk about it. And this is really detrimental to our discourse. I think we need to take a serious look, and of course I'm throwing myself in this pot, in terms of our epistemic humility, which is like, maybe I really don't know what's going on here. Maybe to get the full picture, I would have to listen to like lots of voices and think about this for a long time and really be mature in my decision-making as to what I ought to believe before I go spouting off what so-and-so said on YouTube, or regurgitating what some blogger said. So to kind of wrap up this objection, like I said, I wanted to respond to this one the strongest because I think it's totally misguided. It's not producing an informed public. It's producing a public with just enough information to be dangerous, just enough true information to make them really confident, overconfident in making decisions, and then that leads to our division. That leads to our closing off of our minds to the real truth. So to recap, Postman's position: television makes us less rational in our approach to life. Why? Because it's the type of thing that it is. Because it's a television and we're trying to fit serious conversations in there, that is like trying to fit a square block into a circle peg. And that's going to militate against our human flourishing. It's going to affect everything. It's going to affect how we discourse about important matters. It's going to affect how we think and how we educate. So that's the polemic. I was talking to a colleague. I don't like doing critiques too mean, but happy to take questions. Thank you so much for your attention, and yeah, thank you.